She thought my beat-up car was a joke, but what she didn't know was that the grime hid a fortune, and my stepmother just sold us both out to save her own skin. The smell of cheap air freshener fighting a losing battle against 30 years of accumulated grime was the defining characteristic of my 1998 Toyota Camry. We called her the Brick, not because she was sturdy, though surprisingly she was, but because she was about as sleek and inspiring as a cinder block painted beige. My stepmother, Clarissa, however, preferred more evocative insults. It was Sunday morning, the kind of bright, aggressively cheerful morning that only serves to highlight everyone's imperfections. I was loading groceries, the healthy, organic kind Clarissa insisted upon, into the passenger seat, having already crammed the trunk full of bulk paper towels and enough bottled water to survive a small apocalypse. Clarissa swept onto the porch, dressed in impossibly white athleisure wear that screamed, "I pay more for my yoga mat than you pay for rent." She paused, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her throat in a gesture of performative horror. "Oh, darling," she cooed, her voice dripping with condescension that could curdle milk. "Are you actually planning on putting the artisan goat cheese next to that thing?" She gestured at the Camry with a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. I tried to keep my expression neutral. "It's a car, Clarissa, and the cheese is staying put until I get it into the fridge." "A car?" she scoffed, circling the Brick like a predator assessing weak prey. "Honey, that's not a car. That's an ecological disaster on 4 flat tires. I swear the rattling sound it makes when you accelerate sounds like a dying badger trapped in a washing machine." My father, bless his oblivious heart, was already halfway down the driveway in his sleek, silent hybrid SUV, honking impatiently. He hated confrontations, especially those involving his new wife and his old car. "Just hurry up, Finn," he called out. "We're late for brunch at the Montrose Club." I slammed the trunk shut, ignoring Clarissa's sharp intake of breath. The Montrose Club, where the elite gathered to discuss tax shelters and the appalling taste of anyone who didn't summer in the Hamptons, and where I, Finn, the perpetually underemployed stepson with the dying badger transport, was expected to make a silent, invisible appearance. "Look, Clarissa," I said, wiping a bead of sweat from my forehead. "This vehicle has character. It's dependable. It gets me where I need to go." "Dependable?" "Finn, last week the passenger window rolled down and refused to come back up until you banged the dashboard 3 times with a rolled-up newspaper. That's not dependability. That's a hostage situation with electronics." She paused, leaning in conspiratorially, her perfume, something expensive involving sandalwood and regret, washing over me. "Honestly, the only thing you're delivering in that heap is disappointment." She laughed, a bright, brittle sound, and then turned to join my father. What Clarissa didn't know, what no one knew, was that the disappointment she mocked was the only thing keeping her entire carefully constructed world from collapsing into scandal. The irony wasn't just thick, it was suffocating. For the past 6 months, while she and Dad were busy planning their next European river cruise, the Brick had been my underground office. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, under the cover of darkness, I wasn't just running errands for my part-time job stocking shelves at the hardware store. I was running discreet, untraceable deliveries. These weren't just any deliveries. These were documents, encrypted hard drives, and small, heavy boxes of negotiable bonds. They were the loose ends of the massive financial house of cards that Clarissa's estranged, very recently deceased brother, Marcus, had built and subsequently burned down in 3 different states. Marcus hadn't just died in that unfortunate sailing accident. He'd panicked when the SEC started sniffing around, and he'd hidden the tangible proof, the family's true fortune, the liquid assets that could bail out the entire extended family before the federal indictments landed. And who did Marcus trust to move these priceless artifacts under the noses of federal agents who were already monitoring every digital footprint of Clarissa's immediate family? Not a professional courier, not a lawyer. He trusted the only person in the family who everyone, especially Clarissa, completely underestimated. Me, the kid with the terrible car. Last night had been the final, most critical pickup. A locked, fire-resistant safe containing the original bearer bonds hidden in a storage unit Clarissa thought she'd cleared out 3 years ago. The safe was currently resting on the floor of my passenger seat, hidden beneath a pile of old McDonald's wrappers and a discarded denim jacket. It weighed a ton. As I finally got into the driver's seat, the familiar smell of mildew and old French fries enveloped me. I glanced back at the house, watching Clarissa wave a pristine white glove at me from the window. She looked so smug, so secure in her perceived superiority. I put the key in the ignition, the brick groaning into reluctant life. The engine sputtered, caught, and then settled into its usual death rattle. I checked the rearview mirror one last time, catching sight of the heavy safe just as my phone vibrated with a message. An encrypted ping from the same anonymous source who'd set up the entire retrieval operation for Marcus. I tapped the notification. It wasn't the usual confirmation code. It was a single line of text, chillingly direct. Package secured. Move immediately. The surveillance team isn't watching the roads anymore. They're watching the drivers. My blood ran cold. If they weren't watching the roads, where the hell were they watching? And who, exactly, was they? The message burned itself onto my internal vision. They're watching the drivers. It implied a shift from monitoring the packages, the logistics, the routes, the classic sting operation, to monitoring the courier, me. And if the feds, or worse, Marcus's less-than-savory business partners, had identified the old beige Camry as the key piece of the puzzle, my time was up. I jammed the gear shift into drive, the transmission grinding a protest that sounded suspiciously like an alarm bell. Brunch at the Montrose Club was a 20-minute drive across town, through the busiest section of the city center. It was the worst possible route for an emergency evasion, but deviating now would look far too suspicious. "Stay calm, Finn," I muttered to myself, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. The safe, the repository of Clarissa's entire ill-gotten legacy, was pressing against my right leg, an unwelcome, heavy passenger. I pulled out of the driveway just as Dad's hybrid sped past, Clarissa already settling into the passenger seat, likely checking her stock portfolio. They hadn't even noticed my slight delay. Good. Any noticeable change in my driving pattern, any sudden burst of speed, and I'd confirm their suspicions. The first few blocks were agony. Every red light felt like a trap closing. Every driver looking in my direction felt like an operative. I focused on maintaining the precise speed limit, nodding meekly at the one or two neighbors who recognized me and waved. Neighbors who probably thought I was still delivering pizzas. As I hit Main Street, the traffic thickened. Horns began to blare. I kept my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, checking the standard blind spots. Nothing immediately threatening. No black sedans keeping a steady distance. No unmarked vans parked suspiciously near construction sites. That was the problem with modern surveillance. It wasn't always the cinematic cliches. I glanced down at my phone again, revisiting the anonymous text. I needed to know who sent it. The encryption key I used for Marcus's network was complex, designed to shield me even from internal leaks. I opened the secure communication app, typing a coded query for the source's identity. Send confirmation. The reply was instantaneous, which was unusual for this network. Usually there was a mandated 2-hour delay. Source compromised. Delete everything, panic spiked. If the source was compromised, it meant the network was burned. It meant someone had traced the delivery chain backward, right to the anonymous contact who orchestrated the whole thing, the contact who had been my lifeline. I risked a quick look at the side mirror. A nondescript white panel van, the kind used by plumbers or florists, had pulled up about 3 cars behind me, hovering just a little too long at the intersection lights. It looked ordinary, but its tires were suspiciously clean, and the driver was wearing a baseball cap pulled low, even though the sun was high. I took the next right turn onto Elm, a street known for its independent boutiques and heavy police patrols during the day. If I was being followed, they would have to commit immediately to keep up without looking obvious. The brick responded to the turn with a violent shudder. The passenger door, the one Clarissa had mocked, began to rattle ominously. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the panel van. It followed. Smoothly, easily, maintaining perfect distance. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't paranoia. This was active pursuit. I needed to get to my drop point, a designated safe house where I was supposed to hand off the safe and the final encrypted ledger. The safe house was 10 minutes away, requiring me to navigate a cramped, winding set of back alleys near the industrial district. "Okay, old girl," I whispered to the brick, patting the dashboard near the cracked vinyl. "Time to earn your sticker price." I accelerated, pushing the tired engine harder than I had in months. The Camry sputtered, protesting the sudden demand, but it picked up speed. The white van matched my increase instantly. No hesitation. I spotted a detour sign ahead, a sudden road closure due to utility work, forcing all traffic onto the parallel service road. This was a gift. The service road was narrow, poorly maintained, and rarely used by anyone other than delivery trucks heading to the massive warehouses. I wrenched the steering wheel hard, sending the brick listing dangerously. The passenger side door immediately flew open with a violent thwack, flapping wildly in the wind like a broken wing. The goat cheese, which I'd forgotten about in the adrenaline rush, tumbled out onto the pavement, presumably to be run over by the pursuing van. I didn't care about the artisanal dairy products. I cared about the safe. Through the open doorway, I could see the panel van now. It wasn't slowing down. In fact, it seemed to be accelerating, closing the gap. I caught a fleeting glimpse of the driver, no baseball cap now, and saw something glinting under his raised arm. It looked metallic. I corrected my trajectory, adrenaline giving me the clarity to think 3 steps ahead. I couldn't outrun them on the main road, but the service road was a maze of dumpsters and loading docks. I slammed on the brakes just before entering the narrow alleyway, throwing the gear stick violently into reverse. The brick shrieked in mechanical agony. The white van, committed to its pursuit, didn't anticipate the abrupt reversal. It screeched, tires smoking, as the driver realized he was about to plow directly into my rear bumper. The driver slammed on his brakes, stopping inches short of impact. For a terrifying second, the 2 vehicles sat nose to nose, the silence only broken by the frantic ticking of my cooling engine. Then the passenger door of the white van flew open, and a figure, large, wearing dark clothing, vaulted out, not toward my driver's side, but directly toward the gaping, empty passenger door of the brick. He wasn't reaching for the steering wheel. He wasn't trying to grab me. He was aiming for the floor where the safe was supposed to be nestled under the jacket. He lunged, his hand disappearing into the interior space, his face contorted in a snarl of furious determination. But he found only the torn vinyl seat cover and the scent of stale coffee. The safe and the rest of the fortune wasn't there anymore. My eyes snapped to the rearview mirror again, and I saw it. My distraction had worked, but at a terrible cost. While the follower was focused on the passenger side, another vehicle, black and much faster, had peeled off from the main road and was now bearing down on my rear, flanking me, boxing me in against the industrial wall. And then I realized why the anonymous contact had said they were watching the drivers. I looked down at the center console where I had left my phone for a split second while reversing. The screen wasn't showing the delivery app anymore. It was showing a live, grainy video feed. It was a feed of my own house. And Clarissa, looking up at the security camera mounted above the garage door, was slowly, deliberately lifting her hand and pressing a tiny button concealed beneath the strap of her expensive watch. The image on my phone screen, the silent confirmation of my stepmother's betrayal, hit me harder than the near miss with the pursuing van. Clarissa. The woman who mocked the scent of my old upholstery was the one who had just flipped the switch, signaling my pursuers that the bait was moving. She wasn't just oblivious, she was the architect of the trap. The black car behind me laid on its horn, a sustained, aggressive blast that seemed to shake the very frame of the brick. The man reaching into the empty passenger compartment cursed loudly, pulling his hand back, realizing the safe was gone. I had anticipated the threat from the outside, the anonymous enemies Marcus had made. I hadn't accounted for the threat coming from the very foyer where Clarissa had stood, judging my beige sedan. I shoved the gear stick into first, stomping the accelerator before the man could recover. The brick lurched forward, tires screeching against the grimy asphalt of the alley. The man chasing the empty interior abandoned his search and sprinted toward the black car, which was already pulling alongside me, attempting to box me in completely against the warehouse wall. "Finn! Stop the vehicle!" a voice boomed, amplified by a megaphone from the black car. It was the man who had been driving the white panel van, now leaning out the window, holding not a gun, but a pair of high-powered binoculars aimed directly at my face. They weren't trying to stop the car. They were confirming the driver's identity. I yanked the steering wheel left, scraping the brick side panel against the brick of the warehouse. The sound was deafening, a screech of metal against stone, but it bought me a crucial second of clearance. The black car hesitated, wary of damaging its expensive paint job on the rough surface. I looked down at my lap. The safe wasn't there, but the real prize was. Tucked deep into the fold of the old driver's side sun visor was the secondary objective, a small leather-bound journal that contained the decryption keys for all of Marcus's offshore accounts. The keys that proved Clarissa's family had been laundering money for years, completely separate from the SEC investigation Marcus had been running from. If Clarissa was working with these people, it meant they wanted the journal more than the bonds. The bonds were traceable. The journal was the skeleton key to their entire operation. I had to get out of the city, and I needed a diversion that didn't involve crashing into an innocent civilian. I spotted it ahead, a massive, aging textile factory, slated for demolition next month. Its chain-link fence was high, but a section near the overflowing dumpster looked loose. I swerved the brick violently toward the fence, ignoring the frantic shouts from the black car. I aimed not for the fence itself, but for the massive, rusting dumpster situated just behind it. "Hold tight, old girl," I muttered, bracing myself. I hit the dumpster with a sickening crunch. The impact launched the heavy metal container sideways, tearing a massive, jagged hole in the chain-link fence. The brick, miraculously, slid through the gap, the torn metal ripping a long gash down its side, but keeping the engine running. I was now inside the perimeter of the abandoned factory yard. It was a concrete wasteland littered with skeletal machinery and towering piles of discarded fabric rolls. It was maze-like, offering concealment, but also deadly dead ends. The black car roared through the gap behind me, less careful of the damage, the driver clearly more interested in apprehension than preservation. The white van seemed to have stopped, perhaps recognizing that a low-speed chase in an industrial yard wasn't their strong suit. I drove deeper into the yard, kicking up clouds of thick, suffocating dust. I had perhaps 30 seconds before the black car caught up. I slammed on the brakes near a stack of immense canvas-wrapped bundles, the kind of material used for heavy-duty tarps or sails. I threw open the driver's door, the one that was still intact, and scrambled out, grabbing the sun visor journal. I tucked it inside my jacket just as the black car screeched to a halt 50 yards behind me. The man who had been reaching into the passenger seat jumped out, followed by the driver. They were closing fast, flanking me, cutting off any chance of circling back to the broken fence. I looked wildly around. There was nowhere to run except deeper into the shadowy recesses of the factory complex. And then I saw it. A service ladder bolted to the side of the main processing tower, leading up to the catwalks 50 feet above. I sprinted toward the ladder. My lungs were burning, the dust choking me. But the sight of the two determined men gaining ground spurred me on. I grabbed the cold, rusted rungs and started climbing, ascending with a desperate speed, fueled by pure terror. I made it about 20 feet up when I heard a sharp crack from below. It wasn't a shout. It was the sound of a high-powered rifle being discharged. A small, neat hole appeared in the metal siding of the factory wall, inches from my left foot. They weren't playing around anymore. They were shooting to stop me. I scrambled faster, pulling myself onto the narrow, vibrating catwalk. I could see the city skyline in the distance, so close yet utterly unreachable. I looked back down. The two men were standing at the base of the ladder, one of them reloading. The driver was leveling a rifle straight at my chest. Then my phone buzzed again. It was a new notification, but not from the encrypted network. It was a simple text message, the kind that uses your regular carrier signal. It was from an unknown number, but the message was terrifyingly familiar. It was a photo of my father, sitting alone at a pristine white linen table at the Montrose Club, nervously sipping water. A single man in a crisp suit, who was decidedly not the waiter, was sitting across from him, leaning in close. And the caption below the photo read, "Forget the car, Finn. Come down and join the brunch. We're expecting your stepmother, too." The image of my father, isolated and clearly under duress at the opulent Montrose Club, shattered the last fragments of my carefully constructed escape plan. It wasn't just a threat. It was a coordinated, highly sophisticated tactical move. They hadn't just tracked me. They had intersected Clarissa's movements and neutralized the highest value hostage immediately available, the unwitting patriarch. My heart seized. Clarissa hadn't just betrayed me. She had set up a two-pronged ambush. While her associates chased the decoy, the empty Camry, she was delivering my father directly into the hands of whoever Marcus had truly double-crossed. The safe and the journal were secondary. My father was the leash, and Clarissa held the collar. I was clinging to a vibrating catwalk 50 feet above a concrete graveyard, the rifle barrel below me steady and pointed. "Down here, boy," the driver of the black car bellowed, his voice echoing off the corrugated iron of the factory roof. "The Montrose reservation is getting cold. Bring the book." I pressed myself against the cold steel support beam, the journal feeling suddenly heavy and flammable under my jacket. Fighting them here was suicide. They had the high ground advantage through sheer firepower and control of the exit. I had two choices: surrender the journal and pray they honored the deal with my father, or use the factory itself as leverage. Scanning the immediate area, I saw the vast, shadowy maw of an open loading bay door about 30 yards down the catwalk, leading into the main floor of the abandoned facility. It was dark, treacherous, and offered verticality, my only remaining asset. I took a deep breath, the dusty air burning my lungs, and yelled down toward the rifleman. "He's clean. He knows nothing about the safe. You want the leverage? You'll have to come get it." I didn't wait for a response. I sprinted along the narrow metal grating. The catwalk swayed precariously under my sudden weight, emitting a symphony of loud groans and rattling bolts. Each footfall felt like it might be the one that sent me plummeting. As I reached the edge of the loading bay, I looked back. The two men were moving fast, one scrambling up the ladder, the other, the driver, had found a heavy piece of scrap metal and was heaving it toward the base of the tower, clearly intending to sabotage the ladder supports. I reached the edge, vaulted over the rusty railing, and dropped onto a mound of discarded stiff canvas rolls inside the loading bay. I tumbled hard, the journal miraculously staying tucked inside my jacket, but the impact jarred my ankle. A searing pain shot up my leg. I suppressed a cry, forcing myself to move. The interior of the factory was a cavern of shadows, the only light filtering weakly through grime-caked skylights far above. Towering stacks of ancient machinery, looms, presses, cutters, created deep, confusing corridors. It was perfect cover if I could move silently. But silence was not an option for the brick. I remembered the last desperate communication from the anonymous source. "Package secured. Move immediately." The package wasn't the safe. The safe was empty bait. The package was the ledger, the journal, and it had been secured by me. But how had my contact known to warn me if their network was compromised? My phone buzzed again. Not a threat this time, but an incoming call from an unknown number. Desperate, knowing it might be the source trying a last-ditch, non-traceable contact, I answered, keeping my voice low. "Hello?" Static hissed, then a familiar raspy voice broke through. "Finn, it's about time you answered. Listen to me. You're trapped. They have your father." It was Marcus's old lawyer, the one who had set up the entire cleanup operation before Marcus supposedly died. "I know. Clarissa set me up. Who are these people?" I hissed, hobbling behind a massive, silent industrial loom. "They are cleanup crew, Finn, not the feds. They work for the real financier behind Marcus's operation." Clarissa wasn't just his sister. She was his primary money launderer for years. Marcus faked his death to run, but Clarissa struck a deal to save her own skin. She delivered the runner, and she delivered the escape mechanism. The escape mechanism? The journal? No! The journal is just paperwork. The mechanism is the brick. The car, Finn. It's not just an old Camry. Marcus never trusted banks. He used it as the physical dead drop for the real fortune. The gold, the cash reserves. It's wired into the chassis. My mind reeled. The strange, persistent, rattling sound Clarissa mocked. The dying badger. That wasn't the engine failing. That was something heavy and dense shifting inside the frame. The weight I felt pressing against my leg wasn't just the safe, it was the entire hidden fortune. "The safe was a distraction," the lawyer choked out, his voice weakening. "They think you took the journal and the bonds. They don't know you have the actual assets. You have to get the car to the extraction point, Pier 17, before they link it to your father's current location." Suddenly, a blinding halogen light snapped on from the far end of the loading bay, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like fireflies. The man from the ladder had found a manual light switch and flipped it on. He wasn't alone. He was standing next to a forklift, its massive prongs angled low, ready to charge. "Stop talking and start moving, kid," the man yelled, his voice amplified by the metal structure. "We see the sunlight on your ankle, Finn. You're coming down now." I had the journal, the proof of Clarissa's guilt, but the literal fortune was sitting vulnerable, 200 yards away, parked next to a pile of decomposing organic matter. If they reached the brick, they secured the assets, and my father was as good as dead. I looked at the forklift roaring to life, its engine a sudden industrial thunder in the quiet factory. I looked at the ladder leading back up to my dead end. I looked at the darkness deeper inside the building. And then, through the noise of the approaching machine, I heard another sound, a faint, familiar sound that had been totally absent since I left the driveway. It was the distinct high-pitched whine of a hybrid engine powering up, followed by a muffled, furious yell. Clarissa's pristine hybrid SUV was somehow inside the factory complex, too, and it was driving, not cautiously, but directly toward the black vehicle that was blocking my escape route, heading straight for the man with the rifle. The sight of Clarissa's gleaming, silent hybrid bearing down on the black getaway car was so absurd, so perfectly theatrical, that for a split second, my terror gave way to sheer, unadulterated disbelief. Clarissa, the paragon of curated calm, driving her status symbol like a battering ram, the driver of the black car, the one with the rifle, whipped around, momentarily stunned by the audacity of the silver projectile aiming for his flank. The man climbing the ladder froze mid-rung. It was the distraction I needed. "What in the hell is she doing?" the gunman roared, abandoning the climb to protect his ride. Clarissa's SUV struck the black car with a surprisingly heavy thud. It wasn't a crippling crash, but it was enough to send the black car spinning sideways, pinning it momentarily against a stack of steel girders. The rifle clattered onto the concrete floor. In that precious moment of chaos, I didn't hesitate. The pain in my ankle flared as I hobbled out of the shadow of the loom and bolted toward the loading bay exit where the brick sat. If Clarissa was fighting them, it meant she hadn't secured Dad yet, or she was improvising to cover her own tracks. The priority was the car, the gold hidden in its very bones. I reached the beige Camry, ripped the driver's door shut, and locked it with a frantic twist of the manual lock. I jammed the key in the ignition, praying the earlier abuse hadn't permanently crippled the engine. The brick sputtered, coughed dust, and then, with a defiant roar that sounded exactly like a dying badger finally fighting back, it caught. From the loading bay entrance, the man who had been about to drive the forklift appeared, now holding a tire iron. He lunged for the car as I threw it into reverse, backing out into the open space of the factory yard. "You aren't leaving with that!" he screamed. I slammed the brakes, threw the transmission into drive, and aimed the Camry's battered front bumper not at the man, but at the dangling, heavy chain attached to the forklift's hoist. The brick hit the chain with a glancing blow, snapping the link. The heavy hook swung wildly, connecting with the forklift operator's arm before swinging back to smash squarely through the brick's windshield. The safety glass exploded inward, showering me with fine crystalline dust, but the blow had done its job. The hook swung past me, and I gunned the engine, peeling out of the loading bay and heading toward the only open avenue, the road leading back toward the city center, the same route that led straight to the Montrose Club. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Clarissa was out of her SUV, standing between the wreckage of the two pursuit vehicles, looking utterly appalled. Her white yoga pants were already streaked with grease. She wasn't looking at the fallen gunman. She was staring at the brick disappearing down the cracked pavement, her expression a perfect blend of horror and realization. She finally understood the true value of the vehicle she had so relentlessly mocked. I couldn't call the police about my father. That would implicate me in the entire covert operation. I had to use the journal. Driving the brick, now a rattling, half-shattered monument to resilience, I bypassed the city center entirely and headed for Pier 17. The lawyer's voice had been clear. Extraction point. Pier 17 was desolate, lined with warehouses marked for demolition, exactly the kind of place where Marcus would have arranged a clean getaway or a final rendezvous. I found the designated spot, a chipped, faded bollard marked with 3 nearly invisible parallel scratches. I pulled the brick alongside it, cut the engine, and sat in the sudden, shocking silence, the only sound the ticking of cooling metal and my own ragged breathing. The journal was clutched in my hand. I opened the leather cover, found the last entry, a set of GPS coordinates and a coded phrase. I typed the coordinates into my phone, and a map pinpointed a small private airstrip 40 miles north, a place called Shadow Creek Field. As I was about to input the coded phrase, a vehicle pulled up smoothly behind me. It wasn't a black sedan or a panel van. It was a nondescript dark blue sedan, driven by a woman whose face I vaguely recognized from a blurred photo in Marcus's files. The lawyer's assistant, the one who was supposed to be running the back-end verification. She got out, looking exhausted but relieved. "Finn, you made it. We had to scramble the extraction. Clarissa blew the cover when she tried to fight her own cleanup crew." "My father, at the Montrose Club?" I demanded, holding up the journal. "Is he safe?" The assistant's face fell. The lawyer was trying to leverage him, but when the security detail realized you weren't at the rendezvous, they moved your father immediately. They knew the journal was the key to everything else. "Where did they take him?" She pointed toward the passenger seat of the blue sedan. "That's the contingency. We have a secure line to a location near Shadow Creek. If you give me the journal, I can upload the location data and we can move him now." I hesitated, looking from the journal in my hand to the driver's seat of the brick. I pictured the gold, the cash reserves, heavy and real, welded into the chassis of this piece of junk. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not giving this up until my father is physically on that plane. The gold stays with the car. You get my father to Shadow Creek, and then you get the journal." The assistant looked torn, glancing nervously down the deserted pier. "Finn, we don't have time. They'll be here any minute." Suddenly, the sound of distant sirens pierced the quiet air. Local police, responding to the industrial park brawl. They wouldn't know who was who, but they would shut down everything. "You have 5 minutes to confirm Dad is safe," I stated firmly, sliding the journal into my jacket pocket. "Or I drive this vehicle, gold and all, straight into the harbor. Do you want to explain to the authorities how Clarissa's rich brother's fortune sank because you argued with the delivery boy?" The assistant knew she was beaten. She nodded sharply, scrambling into her car. "Fine, but hurry, get the brick moving." She peeled away, leaving me alone with my unreliable chariot. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, sounding somehow stronger, perhaps feeling its own impending victory. I looked at the cracked windshield, then down at the dashboard where the smell of grime and stale air freshener mixed with the faint scent of spent gunpowder from the near miss. I put the car in drive, pointed the brick toward the inland highway, and pushed the accelerator down, ready to outrun the sirens and claim the only thing I had ever truly earned in that family: my freedom, locked inside the most ridiculed piece of scrap metal in the tri-state area. As I merged onto the highway, the brick rattling harder than ever, a small, heavy lump fell from the sun visor area, rolling across the floor and settling near the emergency brake. It wasn't debris. It was a small, heavy gold signet ring. The very ring Marcus had worn in every photo, the one he never took off. Attached to it was a small, folded piece of paper. I pulled over onto the shoulder immediately, heart pounding anew, and snatched it up. The paper was brittle, the ink slightly smeared, but legible. It read, "If you find this, the plan changed." She wasn't covering her tracks. She was securing her insurance. "I'm not dead. Meet me at Shadow Creek. Bring the gold, Finn. Clarissa is mine."